20-year-old boy helped injured horse in stormy night. Next morning, when people knew about it, they laughed at him. But a few years later, it changed his life. Welcome back to the next story of Animal Dream Story. Subscribe to the channel and start an interesting story right away. 20-year-old Herbert lived a quiet and humble life with his grandmother Gran in a small home on the outskirts of town. Their home was surrounded by wildflowers that Gran lovingly tended to, despite her aching joints. The loss of his parents at a young age had left Herbert reserved and introspective, but beneath his quiet exterior was a heart full of warmth and compassion. Herbert's days were long and demanding. He rose before dawn, fetching water from the nearby creek for Grandma's garden. He spends the early morning chopping wood to keep the house warm. Financial struggles were a constant burden. Herbert worked tirelessly at a nearby horse farm, where his tasks ranged from mucking out stalls to repairing fences. Though the labor was grueling, he found a sense of purpose in caring for the horses, especially those who were skittish or neglected. His gentle touch and quiet demeanor seemed to calm even the most anxious animals. His favorite moments were the rare times he got to ride one of the farm's horses across the open fields, the wind rushing past him, offering a fleeting sense of freedom. One stormy night, as Herbert made his way home through the pouring rain, the wind howled through the trees, and thunder cracked loudly in the distance. The downpour had already soaked him to the bone, and the dirt path to his home was turning into a river of mud. Suddenly, a loud crash cut through the cacophony of the storm. Heart-pounding, Herbert stopped in his tracks, straining to see through the sheets of rain. The sound had come from his gate. As he approached, lightning illuminated the scene for a brief moment, revealing a skinny, badly injured horse sprawled on the muddy ground. Its ribs protruded through its matted coat, and its legs trembled weakly as it tried, and failed, to rise. The horse's eyes were wide with terror, rolling as it struggled against an invisible foe. Its body bore the unmistakable signs of prolonged neglect and abuse. Open wounds, old scars, and a dull coat covered in mud and debris. Despite the cold and his exhaustion, Herbert felt a wave of compassion wash over him. He dropped his bag and approached slowly, his boots squelching in the mud. The horse flinched at his presence, letting out a feeble whinny that broke Herbert's heart. "Easy there," he murmured, his voice soft and soothing despite the storm raging around them. "I'm not going to hurt you." The horse resisted, weakly kicking at the ground as Herbert knelt beside it. Undeterred, Herbert pulled a handful of carrots from his bag, leftovers from the horse farm where he worked, and offered one with an outstretched hand. The horse hesitated, its nostrils flaring as it sniffed the treat. After a long moment, it took the carrot gingerly, chewing slowly as if uncertain of the kindness being offered. Herbert took this as a sign to act quickly. Using his raincoat as a makeshift sling, he managed to get the horse onto its feet. It stumbled and leaned heavily against him, nearly knocking him over. "Come on, just a little farther," Herbert encouraged, his voice steady despite the strain. Step by painstaking step, he guided the trembling animal toward his modest barn. Once inside, the storm's fury was muffled by the barn's wooden walls. Herbert lit a candle, its warm light casting long shadows across the hay-covered floor. The horse fell to the floor, its body heaving with labored breaths. Herbert wasted no time. Grabbing an old towel and a bucket of water, he began cleaning its wounds, his hands gentle but purposeful. Each touch made the horse flinch, its muscles tensing in pain and fear, but Herbert whispered words of reassurance. "You're safe now." As the minutes turned into hours, Herbert worked tirelessly. He cleaned cuts, applied ointment, and wrapped the horse's legs in makeshift bandages fashioned from old sheets. He noticed deep scars crisscrossing its body, evidence of years of mistreatment. Tears stung his eyes as he wondered what kind of life this animal had endured. When the immediate care was done, Herbert covered the horse with a wool blanket to keep it warm. Sitting beside it, he thought of a name. The storm outside had brought them together, and the horse's resilience reminded him of the thunder that roared through the night. Thunder, he said softly, reaching out to stroke its neck. That's what I'll call you. Thunder's ears twitched slightly at the sound of his name, and Herbert smiled for the first time that evening. Exhausted, but filled with a sense of purpose, he leaned back against the barn wall, watching over Thunder as the storm continued to rage outside. It wasn't just a horse he had brought into his barn. It was a soul in need of care, a chance to prove that compassion could triumph even in the harshest of storms. The next day, word spread quickly about the injured horse in Herbert's barn. By the time the morning sun had dried the rain-soaked ground, curious villagers were already gossiping outside the bakery and the general store. Some made their way to Herbert's modest home, peering through the barn's open door at the frail creature lying inside. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. "What a waste of time," muttered old Mr. Griggs, the town's most seasoned farmer, shaking his head as he leaned on his cane. "That horse cannot be saved." Others chimed in with harsh opinions. "A sick horse is no good to anyone," declared a woman carrying a basket of eggs. "Herbert's better off focusing on work than wasting his time on this lost cause." Even children, sensing the adults' disdain, whispered and giggled as they pointed at Thunder's skeletal frame and bandaged legs. The mockery stung, but Herbert, though shy, found strength in his conviction. He avoided the villagers' prying eyes, closing the barn door as he returned to Thunder's side. Deep down, he knew they were wrong. There was a spark in Thunder's eyes, a flicker of life and willpower that matched Herbert's own quiet determination. Herbert poured every ounce of energy he had into nursing Thunder back to health. His days became a blur of chores and care. Before going to work at the horse farm, he prepared to feed it some hay and a mixture of oats and apples that he had managed to save. During his lunch break, he searched for herbs in the fields, recalling remedies his grandmother Granny had once shared with him. Granny herself became his unwavering supporter. Though frail and unable to help physically, she sat by Thunder's stall in the afternoons, humming soft tunes to calm the animal. She even shared stories of her youth, when her father had healed an injured plow horse that everyone thought was done for. "Patience and love, Herbert," she would say, her voice firm despite her age. "That's all it takes." Each day brought its challenges. Thunder's wounds often reopened, requiring Herbert to carefully reapply the poultices. The horse remained skittish, flinching at sudden movements and startling at loud noises. But Herbert refused to give up. He spent hours talking to Thunder in low, soothing tones, sometimes reading aloud from an old book he found in the attic. His words weren't just for Thunder. They were for himself, a way to drown out the villagers' doubts and remind himself why he was doing this. The ridicule from the village persisted. On his way home one evening, Herbert overheard two farmers laughing at him outside the tavern. "That boy's got a fool's heart," one said, shaking his head. "All that effort for a horse that's good for nothing." But not everyone mocked him. A kind woman named Mrs. Alden, known for her herbal knowledge, stopped by the barn one afternoon with a jar of homemade salve. "For the wounds," she said quietly, offering a small smile. "Not everyone in this town is blind to what you're doing, Herbert." Her words gave him a glimmer of hope that perhaps not everyone thought his efforts were in vain. As the days turned into weeks, Thunder began to show more signs of improvement. His wounds started to heal, and his coat, though still patchy, gained a faint sheen. He lifted his head more often, watching Herbert with a curious gaze. And one morning, as Herbert entered the barn with fresh water, Thunder let out a soft nicker, a sound that brought tears to Herbert's eyes. It was the first sign that the horse was beginning to trust him. Despite the odds and the voices of doubt, Herbert pressed on, knowing that Thunder's recovery wasn't just about saving a horse, It was about proving that kindness and determination could triumph over neglect and despair. It was about reminding himself, and perhaps the entire village, that even the most broken spirits deserved a second chance. Weeks passed, and Herbert's unwavering care began to yield remarkable results. At first, the progress was slow. Thunder struggled to finish even the smallest portions of feed, and his legs trembled under the weight of his own body. But Herbert remained patient, adjusting Thunder's diet with Grain's advice and massaging the horse's legs each evening to improve circulation. Gradually, Thunder began to regain strength. One morning, Herbert entered the barn to find Thunder standing on his own for the first time, his head raised high. The sight filled Herbert with a surge of pride and hope. As Thunder grew stronger, his personality began to emerge. The once timid horse began to nudge Herbert playfully during feeding time and occasionally pawed at the ground, a sign of his growing confidence. Herbert began introducing Thunder to short walks in the paddock, guiding him gently and encouraging him with soft words. Thunder's eyes, once clouded with pain and fear, began to sparkle with curiosity. He started responding to Herbert's presence, nickering softly whenever the boy approached the barn. For Herbert, these small milestones felt like monumental victories, proof that love and patience could work wonders. At night, he would sit with Grenna by the fire, recounting every little progress Thunder had made that day. Grenna would smile, her wrinkled hands busy with her knitting. "I knew he'd come around," she would say. "You've got a gift, Herbert." Despite these signs of improvement, the villagers' skepticism persisted. Herbert tried to ignore them, focusing instead on Thunder's recovery. But not everyone doubted him. One afternoon, Mr. Grayson, a retired farmer who lived nearby, stopped by the barn to see Thunder. Grayson had always been a quiet man, but he had a keen eye for animals and recognized the progress Herbert had made. "You've done something special here, lad," Grayson said, leaning on the barn door as he watched Thunder graze in the paddock. "That horse has spirit, and so do you." His words caught Herbert off guard, and he felt a lump rise in his throat. No one had ever acknowledged his efforts so plainly before. Encouraged by what he saw, Grayson offered an unexpected suggestion. "The village race is coming up," he said, stroking his graying beard. "You should enter Thunder. Show them what resilience looks like." Herbert hesitated, unsure if Thunder was ready for such a challenge, but the thought ignited a spark of determination in him. Grayson placed a reassuring hand on Herbert's shoulder. "You've already proved them wrong by saving him," he said. "Now let them see what he's capable of." The idea of entering the race filled Herbert with both excitement and doubt. He spent the following days increasing Thunder's training, introducing new exercises to build the horse's strength and agility. Thunder, eager to please, rose to each challenge with surprising enthusiasm. He began galloping short distances around the paddock, his hooves kicking up clouds of dust as Herbert cheered him on. One evening, as Herbert brushed Thunder's mane under the glow of the lantern, he found himself speaking aloud. "We've come so far, boy," he said, his voice tinged with both pride and disbelief. Thunder turned his head slightly as if listening. In that moment, Herbert realized that the upcoming race wasn't just about proving the villagers wrong. It was about celebrating the journey he and Thunder had shared, a journey of healing, trust, and second chances. News of Thunder's progress began to spread, and while some villagers remained skeptical, others grew curious. Children peered through the paddock fence, giggling as Thunder trotted by, his coat now sleek and shining. Even those who had doubted Herbert started to soften, their sneers replaced by quiet nods of acknowledgement. Thunder's transformation had become impossible to ignore. As the race approached, Herbert felt a growing sense of anticipation. This wasn't just a competition. It was a chance to show the world what resilience and kindness could achieve. With each passing day, his bond with Thunder deepened, and the once hopeless horse became a symbol of hope, not just for Herbert, but for the entire village. Before we continue the story, do you think Elliot and Thunder will win? Comment and come back to the story. On race day, the village gathered at the edge of the dusty track, the usual quiet streets now bustling with excitement. Vendors lined the path, selling roasted nuts and candied apples, while children darted around, clutching colorful ribbons they had picked to support their favorite racers. The air was alive with chatter, laughter, and the occasional whinny of a horse. Herbert and Thunder, though far from the most polished pair, stepped forward to the starting line. Thunder, once frail and broken, now stood tall and proud, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd as villagers who had once mocked Herbert now found themselves staring in disbelief. "Is that the same horse?" one woman murmured, her tone a mix of awe and confusion. Even the other racers exchanged glances, clearly impressed by Thunder's transformation. As the race was about to begin, Herbert glanced at Thunder, placing a steady hand on his neck. "We've got this," he whispered, drawing strength from the bond they had built. The starter raised the flag, and with a sharp wave, the race began. The track, a challenging course with sharp turns and uneven terrain, tested both horse and rider. Thunder, though smaller and less experienced than many of the other horses, proved his mettle early on. He matched the pace of the finest racers, his hooves kicking up dust as he surged forward. The crowd's initial murmurs turned to cheers, many unable to look away from the boy and his once hopeless horse. Herbert leaned low, guiding Thunder through the first set of turns with precision. The bond between them was evident in every stride, their movements perfectly in sync. At one particularly tight bend, Thunder managed to outmaneuver a larger horse, earning gasps of admiration from the spectators. "He's incredible," someone shouted, and the sentiment rippled through the crowd. As the race reached its midpoint, Thunder began to gain ground, his speed and agility surprising even Herbert. For the first time, victory felt within reach. But just as they approached the final stretch, a sudden commotion drew Herbert's attention. Ahead, a rider had lost control of their horse on a tricky incline, and both had tumbled to the ground. The horse was panicked, thrashing wildly, while the rider struggled to rise, clutching their arm in pain. Herbert didn't hesitate. Despite the shouts of spectators urging him to press on, he veered off the track and headed toward the fallen pair. Pulling Thunder to a halt, he leaped from the saddle and rushed to the injured rider's side. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos. The rider, a young girl, nodded through tears, cradling her injured arm. "My horse," she whispered, her eyes darting toward the frightened animal. Herbert approached the horse cautiously, his hands raised in a calming gesture. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice soothing as he stepped closer. Thunder, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, stood still and steady, exuding a calm presence that seemed to reassure the panicked horse. Herbert gently took hold of the reins, stroking the animal's neck until it quieted. The crowd, initially confused by Herbert's actions, began to realize what was happening. A hush fell over the spectators as they watched him guide the injured horse and its rider to the edge of the track, ensuring they were safely out of harm's way. By the time Herbert returned to Thunder, the other racers had already crossed the finish line. Though he had forfeited his chance at victory, the crowd erupted into applause as he mounted Thunder once more. The cheers were louder than they had been for the winners, filled with admiration and gratitude for his selflessness. As Herbert and Thunder trotted back to the starting line, villagers rushed to meet them, their expressions a mix of respect and awe. The injured rider's parents approached, tears streaming down their faces as they thanked Herbert profusely. "You're a true hero," the girl's father said, shaking his hand firmly. In that moment, Herbert realized that he had achieved something far greater than winning a race. Thunder nickered softly, nudging Herbert's hand as if to say, "You did the right thing." Together they stood before the crowd, a testament to resilience, compassion, and the unbreakable bond between a boy and his horse. Thunder's recovery and Herbert's heroic gesture became a symbol of hope and perseverance for the village, igniting a transformation that reached far beyond the young boy's modest farm. News of Herbert's actions spread rapidly, and his once isolated home began to attract visitors from all corners of the community. Neighbors who had once mocked him arrived at his gate, bringing sacks of feed, bales of hay, and homemade remedies for Thunder. They came not out of pity, but admiration, inspired by the remarkable bond between the boy and his horse. One afternoon, Mrs. Alden, who rarely ventured beyond her own property, arrived with a carefully wrapped package. "I've been holding on to this old saddle for years," she said, handing it to Herbert. "It's not much, but I thought Thunder might appreciate it someday." Her gesture was followed by many others. A carpenter offered to repair the barn's creaky door. A blacksmith donated a new set of horseshoes, and a group of children painted a colorful sign that read, "Thunder's Haven," to hang above the barn door. Graney's small home became a bustling community hub. Villagers gathered in the cozy living room, warmed by the crackling fire, to share stories of resilience and hope. Graine, who had once spent her days in solitude, now found herself surrounded by lively conversations and the comforting hum of laughter. She often served tea and her famous apple pie to the visitors, her pride in Herbert shining through her every word. Herbert, though shy by nature, found himself stepping into an unexpected role as a mentor. Farmers sought his advice on caring for injured or neglected animals, and parents brought their children to meet Thunder, hoping to teach them the value of compassion. One boy, wide-eyed as he stroked Thunder's mane, asked Herbert, "Do you think I could help animals someday too?" Herbert smiled, crouching to meet the boy's gaze. "Of course," he said. "It just takes patience and a kind heart." Thunder, now a picture of health and strength, seemed to thrive in the attention. He became a symbol of the village's newfound unity, often standing at the paddock fence to greet visitors with a gentle nicker. One day, an elderly man who had once dismissed Thunder as a lost cause approached the paddock. "I was wrong about you, lad," he admitted, tipping his hat to Herbert. "And about this horse. You've shown us all what can happen when we don't give up." The bond between Herbert and Thunder continued to inspire acts of kindness throughout the community. A group of teenagers organized a fundraiser to help support Herbert's growing farm, hosting a bake sale and donating the proceeds to his efforts. The funds allowed Herbert to buy new tools, build a proper shelter for Thunder, and create a small paddock for other animals in need. One memorable evening, the villagers organized a gathering at Herbert's farm to celebrate Thunder's journey and the changes it had brought to their community. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting a warm glow over the paddock, and the sound of music and laughter filled the air. Grena, standing beside Herbert, leaned in and whispered, "Look at what you've done. You've brought them all together." Thunder's story inspired a ripple effect, encouraging villagers to look beyond appearances and offer help to those in need, whether animal or human. Stray dogs and cats found homes, and struggling farmers received unexpected offers of help from their neighbors. A once divided village had come together, united by the strength found in resilience and compassion. As Herbert stood beside Thunder in the paddock that night, watching the villagers celebrate under the starlit sky, he realized that their journey had become something far greater than he could have imagined. Thunder wasn't just a symbol of hope. He was a testament to the transformative power of kindness, a reminder that even the smallest acts of care could spark profound change. After watching this story, do you think it's a great thing to help people and animals? There are many more true stories on the channel for you to enjoy, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to let us know you still love animals and their stories.